Monsieur William Clark, secrétaire adjoint au ministère du Conseil exécutif, Monsieur Colin Williams, Raymond Théberge, Commissioner of Official Languages, Stephen Coltitz, Assistant Deputy Minister of Education. Permettez-moi de me présenter. Je suis le professeur Jason Camelot, l'historien des affaires professorales à la Faculté des Arts et des Sciences à l'Université Concordia. J'ai l'agréable devoir de vous accueillir chaleureusement à l'Université Concordia. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded indigenous lands. The Ganyangehaga nation is recognized as the custodian of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. We're here today to participate in an important forum called Minority Community Vitality Through Education. The Quebec English-Speaking Communities Research Network, or QUESCREN, through its committee, the Interlevel Educational Table, or ILET, or is it ILET? ILET, organized the forum. QUESCREN is a collaborative network based here at Concordia in the School of Community and Public Affairs. It brings together researchers, stakeholders, educational institutions, and other institutions to improve understanding of Quebec's English-speaking communities and to promote their vitality. QUESCREN's co-directors are my colleagues, Dr. Brian Lewis, he's a professor of communications at Concordia, and Dr. Chedley Belkota, principal and professor of the School of Community and Public Affairs. Concordia has been a proud supporter of QUESCREN since its creation a decade ago. QUESCREN actively supports research on English-speaking communities through its recruitment of over 40 researcher members, the production of an online bibliography with over 11,000 references, and a newsletter that goes out to over 800 people. QUESCREN also has organized over 30 conferences, workshops, and symposia on many subjects, including, for instance, the 40th anniversary of Bill 101. QUESCREN, in collaboration with partners, plans to hold a conference next year on the 50th anniversary of the Official Languages Act. It'll be held in May at the Association Francophone pour le Savoir Annual Congress, or LACFAS, in Gatineau. In 2017, QUESCREN created a new committee called the Interlevel Educational Table, or ILET. It brings together representatives of Quebec's English language educational institutions and associations, along with community groups and the public sector. This year, ILET set a two-pronged action plan for itself. First, it has a research action plan. So ILET promotes research on Quebec's English-speaking communities through its active support of the development of significant research projects, an online researcher directory, and other research-related activities. To that end, one of the workshops at this forum taking place tomorrow, which I'll actually be participating in, is going to bring together over a dozen research members to start developing joint projects of research on community priority projects. A preliminary list of research areas proposed by the leader of this initiative, Chedley, is arts, culture, identity, history, and heritage as the first axis, education, youth training, and retention is the second axis, employment, poverty, social exclusion or inclusion, and finally, immigration, migration, and mobility. Another way that ILET's promoting the development and dissemination of research is through creating biennial community building forums, and today we're at the first such forum. The second element of ILET's action plan is its educational action plan. To enhance Quebec's English-speaking community vitality, ILET supports activities promoting the continuum of Quebec's English language educational offer in the collaboration of English language educational institutions. The continuum of educational offer concept is used in Canada's Francophone minority communities, Quebec's Ministry of Education, and some fields of education, including medical and special education. Within the Francophone communities, it is promoted as a community vitality initiative. For Quebec's English language educational sector, a strong continuum of educational offer might involve overall support for the smooth progression of students between different educational levels from pre-K all the way to university, specific interinstitutional sequences of pathways of course offerings, services, or programs. Those are just a few examples. At Concordia, for example, we have an initiative to promote such linkages in our CEGEP partnerships. It promotes pathways such as articulation agreements that facilitate student progression from CEGEPs, including the English language CEGEPs in our faculties. Ms. Emilie Martel, senior lead of this CEGEP Partnerships Initiative at Concordia, is a member of ILET. She's also a participant in this forum, and she's moderating tomorrow's panel that's titled Defining and Measuring Community Vitality. Comme en témoignent les activités menées par le RRCQEA et l'ILET, l'Université Concordia attache une grande importance au partenariat, à l'engagement communautaire et au décloisonnement du milieu universitaire. Je suis heureux que le forum reflète ces valeurs. I'd also like to express Concordia's sincere thanks to partners that provided financial support for the forum: the Government of Quebec, through the Secretariat for Relations with English-Speaking Quebecers, Canadian Heritage, Entente Canada-Quebec, the Canadian Institute for Research on Linguistic Minorities, Via Rail, Bishop's University, and the Quebec Community Groups Network. So I wish you all an excellent day two, I should say, of this 3-day Minority Community Vitality Through Education Forum. I hope you agree, I'm confident that you agree, that the Forum Program Committee has lined up a very exciting series of activities and events today and tomorrow as well.
Bonjour, hi. Mustn't forget hi. So yes, I'm Richard Bourhis. I have the pleasure to introduce Professor Colin Williams this morning. He is a member of the School of Welsh at Cardiff University. He's also a fellow and a senior research associate at the University of Cambridge, where he specializes in post-conflict reconstruction and reconciliation. He does that with many different groups in the world. Colin has the following main scholarly interests, and that's how I got to know him, is through sociolinguistics and language policy in multilingual societies, ethnic and minority relations, political geography, and peace studies. Of interest here, of course, is that Colin has advised government agencies in Europe on minority language and education issues, and he currently advises the Welsh government on its official language strategies. He was a founding member and initiator of the European Union Network for the Promotion of Linguistic Diversity, and also the International Association of Language Commissioners, of which there are 9 in the world. Big association. No further ado, I'd like to then give the floor to Colin, because he's got many interesting things to present for you this morning. So welcome, and thank you very much, Colin, for coming over.
Bien, merci, Richard. Bonjour à tous. I'm delighted to be here, basically to learn from you and to understand the issues that you have. And in thanking the organisers, I'm going to thank you in a very dubious way, because I was asked by one of you, Little Breton, to represent Welsh culture by singing. So, as a dutiful servant of the crown, I'll start by singing in Welsh one verse of Shepherd's Lament. The poor man lives on top of a mountain, wild, wild Wales, Celtic mists. His wife has left him, she can't stand him anymore. It's an 18th century ballad. Children left at home, nobody to help him at home. The poor man, typical male in the 18th century, feels sorry for himself. So it's called The Shepherd of Aberdyfi. And the words are there so you can check my Welsh. Ni geisiaf eto gan ei car, bydd gael di nôl fy ngenedlon, i'r gadair siglo ger y tân, ar fynydd a Berdyfi, ha ham fy ngenedd drws, ha ham. Gadewais fi ath blant dinam, mae Arthur bach yn galw ei fam, a'i galon bron a thori. Mae dau oed lliwaith yn y llwyn, a'r plant yn chwarae efo rwyn. O tyrd yn ôl fy ngenedd ddwyn, i fynydd a Berdyfi. What I have is a presentation in 3 slots. One, an overview of European issues from a systematic point of view, and then 2 case studies where I'm using educational initiatives to identify the role of education in the service of society. There'll be other forums, I know, where we go into the details of bilingual education in different contexts. Here I'm trying to relocate education in its political, social context as a public service. So you'll be familiar perhaps with this guideline. It's not an obligation or regulation, but a guideline that the European Union has had since almost 40 years. That plurilingual education should be the mother tongue of the state, not of the individual, the host mother tongue of the state, plus 2 languages, somewhere in the primary and secondary system. But given the diversity of Europe, with about 195 languages, you'll see that some territories adhere very closely to this EU injunction, so their educational system in terms of language tends to follow mother tongue plus 2, whereas other jurisdictions are way off that guideline for all sorts of reasons, geopolitical, historical capacity, and it depends what language mix we're talking about in border areas or in some jurisdictions. So the melange of languages in Europe doesn't necessarily conform to an EU patterned guideline, although in most reports that's what you read about. The reality, as you know, is messy. Also here, I understand. In Europe, you have a constellation of languages. You have the hegemonic state languages, the imperial languages of the nation-state formation. You have immigrant majority and minority languages, Turkish, Arabic, the more recent 200-year perhaps contact with the Mediterranean and with the Middle East. You have sign languages and other languages of special communication. And then you have what I'm concerned with, regional or minority languages as a constellation. Amongst these 195 European minority language groups, some are intensely abutting other languages. So you have what might be called zones of contact or zones in transition, or historically zones of conflict between language groups. And other territories, as you see, huge vast spaces where one language tends to be predominant for all sorts of historical, political reasons. In terms of the practical, not the judicial, the practical constellation of European languages, English is by far dominant. And after Brexit, which you may want to talk to me about during the day, English will still be dominant. It's the lingua anglia of the European continent, despite the absence of Britain perhaps in the future. Then below English as the working language and the commercial and the scientific language of Europe, you have major state languages with imperial parts from military and organizational and political presences, Spanish, French, German, you could have Italian, Polish perhaps even today. Then other state languages, smaller languages, Dutch, Greek, etc. Then regional marriages, which is what I'm interested in, Basque, Catalan, Frisian, Welsh. And then more recently, immigrant minority languages, which are the interesting issue of European policy at the moment, because they pose not just new challenges, but they pose a threat to the social order if they're not managed correctly. In the 60s, 70s and 80s, it was Basque, Irish, Corsican, which posed a threat because of the underlying pressure of violence. ETA, Euskadi Taxatuna, the IRA, and the Corsican violent groups. Today, some of the immigrant minority communities seek violence as a meaning-seeking movement. So there's a threat to the stability of the European state system. And as a consequence, they get a disproportionate share of attention, but not necessarily of rights. And there's this classic historical ambiguity between equity of treatment, efficiency of resources, and recognition of the permanent contribution of immigrant minorities to European states. In terms of its typology, the EU adopts different programs for different types of languages. So in this case, I'm interested mainly in Welsh in my studies, but I've also been doing a lot of work on Ireland as part of the Good Friday Agreement, and I've prepared with 3 others the draft Irish language frontier strategy. And because we're Celts, we don't necessarily mutually understand each other's languages, but we've all suffered under the hegemony of English. So literally, Gaelic, Cornish, Welsh, Berkshire, Irish and Manx collectively boost each other's egos by swapping best practice from one system to the other, in contradistinction to the dominance of English. In recent years, there's been a paradigm shift to multilingualism from bilingualism. For about a generation, bilingualism was the norm. That's what people work on: bilingual education, public administration, jurisdictional, legislative enactments. But today, multilingualism is the new reality. But it isn't always what it appears. English is the dominant language in the mix of European multilingualism. Migration increases linguistic diversity, so now we have 2 recognizable categories of minorities: regional minorities, immigrant minorities. And it's only recently that the 2 have begun to work together to exchange best practice, tactics, strategies, modes of teacher training, all sorts of paradigmatic changes, which mutually enrich the diversity of European language types. And then most critically for my own career, I've been interested in language revitalization in what were considered to be the nations which didn't become states in 19th century and 20th century Europe: Basque, Frisian, Welsh. And it'll be Basque and Welsh that I'll consider today in systemic terms. But what's interesting, given that we're in Montreal, is that in many parts of Europe, it's a city region: Frankfurt, London, Paris, Madrid, Barcelona, where the mix of languages, 140 languages in London, 120 in Barcelona, that is the new challenge for European language policy. How to accommodate such a mix, whether it be considered to be temporary by the state or permanent by the citizenry, and what you have in which is something called supra diversity, which is just a jargon phrase for a mix. But for city managers, for school managers, for resource allocation distribution functions, the new reality of diverse populations stretching from Ecuador to China in your city suburb schools, or inner city schools in many cases, is a huge challenge, just as I understand, of course, it is for you here in Montreal. It's hard enough when you have 2 official languages to cope with that. When you have regional minority languages which have no official status, the notion that migrants coming into your city-state region, learning the hegemonic language of the state, be it Spanish, Italian, or German, or English, sounds appealing, because you want to accommodate them, you want to give them efficient opportunities for employment, for access to social justice. But for the regional minority, new migrants, 1.4 million in Barcelona in the last 10 years, undercuts the attempts by Catalans to establish themselves as the local host majority. So you get all sorts of class, social, linguistic, and ultimately practical quality of life issues in hospitals, in schools, in jails, in care homes. We have research priorities that many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. Just note them to pay acknowledgement of the fact that most of the policy that's in operation is evidence-based policy. As I always tell government cabinets, if they ask me, okay, evidence-based policy sounds good. whose evidence and whose policies are being manipulated by the evidence. It's not a common sense, rational, paradigmatic. It's a political game that we're in. These are the presumed benefits of multilingual education, very familiar to you in the multicultural, multilingual Canada. Just noting them, I don't need to enumerate them in your presence. So if this is the desiderata, the new Europe is supposed to be a melange of 3 or 4 languages so that people can build a team, take jobs, intermarriage patterns, all sorts of things. How do minority regional manage to enter into this new reality, which is encouraged by the commercial, political, military-industrial complex, as well as parental choice at a lower level? Navigating into the mainstream is the overriding trajectory for most of these supplicant minorities. Some educational systems, Catalan, Basque, Frisian and Finnish, have, like the salmon fish, jumped the hurdles to go from ocean to fresh water, and for about 30 years of struggle, reached an apogee, roughly about 2000, 2002, where they thought they arrived at a platform of stability, recognition, allocation of resources, and they were finished. They just had to improve the quality of the education, the public admin that was on offer. And then post-austerity, post-new millennia, a new wave of pressures on the education system through migration, through refugees, through increased mobility due to jobs and tourism, commercial opportunities, threatened the platform that for 30 years or so, Catalans, Basque, Irish, Welsh had thought they'd achieved, and begins to undercut. There's also been a paradigm shift in the generations that have been active in the promotion of diverse languages due to 4 trends, I would say. The development of modern language teaching within statutory education, a huge boom from 1960 to about 2005, 2010. Frankly, in many states in Europe, modern language teaching is on the decline, because English has supplanted French or Italian or German or Russian. And so we can't take for granted the veracity of historically significant literary, cultural and scientific languages as being an absolute repertoire in the curriculum. In many parts of Europe, English has displaced the former dominant modern language. In Finland, English has replaced Russian. In Basque Country, English has replaced French. And in parts of Italy, of course, German, which in the northeast of Italy is quite significant, Slovenia, Carinthia, Austria, and the Alto Adige is being replaced by English. So there's a shift going on in the system. In terms of official language and educational strategies, there's been a plethora of new, very creative strategies at all levels in the hierarchy, from the European level right down to a local authority level. But I want to argue that nearly all of these strategies have their origins in grounded opposition to hegemonic languages. They come effectively from NGOs, from parents, and from resistance groups who for 40 years have sought to influence the state language or the international language repertoire. And so what we need to do is to trace the origins of what's on offer through educational and linguistic strategies from key ideas which have their genesis in the 1920s, 1930s, and more particularly in the 1960s and 1970s. So what we see now in these holistic language and educational strategies, which appear to be rhetorically sound, robust, promising, adequate programs, if they include an element of recognition for a minority language, that tends to be traced back to the 60s and 70s, when parents in particular, student organizations, teacher organizations, sought for many years to influence the majoritarian paradigms. And they're beginning to come through now, not on the grounds of decency, but on the grounds of citizenship. So the social equality, the social justice arguments have been won effectively in many formerly disadvantaged regions. What are the determinants of success? Well, frankly, political control at the local state. Now that you have subsidiarity at the European level, devolution in many parts, quasi-federal systems, the autonomous regions of Spain, particularly Galicia, the Basque Country and Catalonia, control 80% of what happens within those jurisdictions. And so political control has changed the hierarchy of which languages and educational systems are on offer and overturned centuries of discrimination, so that now some minority languages do have, à la Quebec, permanence. They are institutionalized in public administration, in the education system, in the legal system. These are some examples for you before I go to my two case studies. The most significant event in each of these jurisdictions I've highlighted. So in Ireland, we have a 20-year language strategy seeking to modernize, stabilize, and diffuse the Irish language throughout the state system. It's not been a success. In Catalonia, the minority language policy has sought to generalize the primacy of Catalan in the regional state system. And as you know, in the last 2 years, that's been mobilized in terms of a separatist or independentist attempt to get more powers from Madrid, either through increased autonomy or through physical separation, constitutional separation from Catalonia, from Madrid. In Wales, the biggest change in the last generation has been the imitation of your Canadian Federal Language Commissioner by having a language commission, but without language rights. It seems very odd. You assume that the Commissioner is there to regulate and protect the rights. The Welsh government is a devolved government separate from Westminster. It thought it was taking a huge risk just to have a language commissioner. And it parked the idea of a suite of defensible language rights that could be constitutionally challenged and protected for another generation. And so, as you'll find out in time, the language commissioner is being abolished in December. Because it isn't efficient, it isn't effective. It was set up to fail. Because it didn't have this parallel infrastructure development of collective rights or individual rights or demonstrable educational, social and political citizenship rights. In the Basque Country, as I'll come to in a minute, there's been a huge political renewal in the post-Franco, post-1975 period to guarantee the primacy of Basque in the public realm. A huge investment, a huge political event, huge numbers of struggles at all sorts of levels to equip the Basque state with its skill set it needs to function as a Basque primate state. Spanish is still, of course, dominant, as we'll see, in the private and leisure sectors. And in places like Friesland, representative of other states, you have devolution of language policy to the local state, to the local regional councils. So there's a huge variety of forms of expression of linguistic rights, linguistic policies, with educational implications, both for the previously dominant majority and for the insurgent regional minority. And that causes all sorts of issues that you're very familiar with here, so I won't trespass. What I think is important is the role of the majority in all this, at all contexts, whether at the state level, the international level, or the local level. Without majority exceedance, most of the minority gains are temporary. Because it's the majority who are the electorate, they're the taxpayers, and increasingly in Europe, it's the majority who feed the minority school system. In parts of Ireland, in Wales, in the Basque Country, 90% of children in the new bilingual schools come from homes where neither parent speaks the language. So you're gifting your child's future, it's an act of faith by parents, into a system that you don't readily reinforce at home. Now, the typical issue is that from a primary level, in Euskadi, in Wales, in Ireland, children are older Christian generations gifting their children to Sunday school to get the basics of Christian teaching, they give their children to the primary school. And they're not particularly too worried if they don't understand the homework, because they often, particularly mothers, do parallel educational improvement. Adult education goes along with it. But when it comes to the serious education business of secondary schools, there's a disjuncture. A large number of children are taken out of these primary schools and put into normal state schools so that the parents can help with the homework, can help with the exam preparation for university. So each stage, kindergarten, primary, age 16, age 18, university, there's a huge drop-off systemically in all the European regional minority contexts. And were 42% of children who started in Welsh medium education to finish at university, our language would be safe. But each interstitial break means a withdrawal back to the default, common sense, natural, normal, logical, God-given hegemonic system. It makes sense to protect your child's future. But the majority are significant, because that's the future. They are the supplicant citizens who will feed the school system. So what minorities have to do in Europe is, of course, protect themselves, mobilize resources, influence politicians, but also make majority aware of their responsibility not only to protect, but to participate in the functional vitality of the minority, at whatever context we're talking about. So we need new ways of looking at old issues, I would argue. I'll just let you read that for a minute. And then I'll turn to the conundrum. If we've had all these policy reforms for the last 30 years, why do we need fresh initiatives? Why isn't the system stable? If the local state controls via education, or public administration, or access to job opportunities, or to television stations, or to the media, why do we need new initiatives? Well, we need them because government programs, which effectively, it's a grant dependency culture we're talking about, it's all done through taxpayers' money, government programs are concerned with outputs, targets, how much is spent on this, that and the other. What we want as active scholars, citizens, parents, is outcomes. We want behavioural change. We don't want expenditure account and programs being ticked on a wish list of political and senior civil servants' desks, because spending money, as we know, creates opportunities. It doesn't change behaviour. So we need fresh thinking about behaviour modification, nudge theory, outcome-based planning. It hasn't been done systemically in many jurisdictions because it's hard. But a cynical taxpayer is justifiably asking, why are we spending all this money if when they leave school in Ireland, they don't speak Irish? Or in Wales, they can speak Welsh, but they don't, in many cases. And rather than throw up your hands and say, well, it's a natural, individual, dominant minority paradigm, we need to be smart. We need to build into our systemic programs behavioural modifying systems. We've done it with plastic, we've done it with smoking, we've done it with seatbelts, we've done it with drug abuse, where we have changed the public mood to what is tolerable, what is honourable, and what is systemically required of government programs. So the challenge I've got to you as people interested in languages, is there something peculiar about language as a part of public policy which doesn't conform so readily to these other types of behavioural modifying programs? Is language so deeply ingrained in our psyche, in our souls, in our hearts, in our heads, in our daily experiential living, that it's resistant to such modification in the short term? In the longer term, who knows? Well, we'll all be dead in the long term. But to get the point, plastics, drug, fresh water, healthy living, organic, kidney gifting when you die. All these things change the way in which we react to certain challenges in society. So outcomes, not just outputs. Hard to do, but let's be sensitized ourselves as NGOs, as government departments, as individuals, to the need to check how behavior has changed as a result of these structural changes in education, or in the law, or in public administration. We're abrogating our responsibility because we're launching programs without anticipating their actual impact on people's lives. And if you're a parent here, you'll know, apart from your husband, your wife, or your partner, your child is the most important treasure that you have. So why gift your child to a regional education system if you haven't got some degree of faith that that system will produce competent speakers who can hold their own in the marketplace, in intermarriage relations, in socialization, and in earning a living? So we need to be very serious about what we do when we launch radical programs which change the status quo and effectively anticipate, as far as we can, some of the outcomes that we want to be desirable for our own and our children's quality of life. I'm not going to go through this, but these are some ways. This is NESTA, the National Environmental Science Technology. It's a government department that was privatized, like everything else in Britain, a few years ago. But it looks at social challenges. And it gives you the holistic perspective. What you need, you don't have to do everything, obviously, as a policy analyst, but you need to be aware of some of these domains and not just focus on spending money or creating teachers or pushing classroom sizes. There are other ancillary, idiosyncratic, often unanticipated implications of our radical changes. And this shows you the complexity of any policy issue that needs to be worked through by somebody before additional expenditure for political rights are controlled. So for the last part, I'm going to look at two promising case studies. The first is the concern with immigration and new speakers. In both Basque Country and Wales, which you could read 14 other jurisdictions, these two new phenomena have coloured the way in which conventional attempts to develop bilingual education have been managed. Quite a sizable number of migrants, not necessarily immigrants from outside Europe, they could be from another neighbouring European state, or they could be people who are in the next state who have moved and want to learn the language, and also what's called new speakers. You would call them historically second language acquisition students. But the new speaker concept in Europe tends to be people who've not only gained knowledge, but have changed their persona so that they assimilate almost as much as they can into the new language network. So they don't go from being English speakers to French speakers completely, that would be silly. But they do appropriate the norms, the values, the cultural artifacts of the new group that they want to enter into. As we heard yesterday, one of the biggest problems facing new speakers is the resistance of old speakers to those who seek to be considered equal. Reproducing language isn't the same as reproducing culture, we understand that. So whether you're phonetically different, whether you have a different faith, whether you have a different place of origin, acceptance by the majority of these new speakers is the salient test of democracy in the new multilingual state. Otherwise, what you're doing is perpetuating power relations which you escape from yourself in this generation. It's insidious and invidious, and therefore we need to encourage the majority to be permissive, open, liberal, accepting, not necessarily completely engaging, because I don't engage with many things. I choose what I do, of course. But you don't send signals out to say, oh yes, I understand you speak French, but you don't really belong. It's a temporary thing, isn't it? Thank you for that, but we know who you are, and we'll call on you when we need you. Well, frankly, that is devious. It's politically corrupt. If you do have a program which says every citizen is equal, you have to act like that publicly. I'm not talking about individuals, I'm talking about the public representatives that we have, politicians, civil servants, programs, etc. So new speakers is a huge phenomenon in Europe. and in many cases, from regional minority languages, new speakers make up a majority of the language group, as the Cape Coloured people who speak Afrikaans in South Africa. So let's go to the first case study quickly, Basque. The Basque education system is one of the little miracles of post-Napoleonic Europe. When Franco died in 1975, the Ikastolas, the Basque system, was basically yesterday's dream. Spanish was hegemonic. 4 types of schools, but the majority were encouraged, forced, socialized into the Spanish state system. So a generation ago, roughly 1985, 1989, 20% enrolled in the Ikastolas, which is the Basque bilingual school system, the immersion school system. Today, 80% of children go through that system, from primary right through to university. And only 5% go to the historically hegemonic Spanish school system. The result is a massive swing in parental choice to identify their Basque heritage, their Basque future. So, different governments, obviously different emphases depending on the political parties, huge investment in transforming the whole public apparatus of Skadi into creating spaces, opportunities, and regulations for qualification for your skill set in this historically disadvantaged language, Euskera. And yet, doubts, uncertainties, fears within the Basque community today. I spent much of the spring investigating this. First of all, formal assessment of their skills and competencies do not match the expectations of professionals and parents. They're hugely disappointed in the exam results that they attest at the higher levels, not primary school, but particularly secondary school level and university level. Despite all the hype and propaganda for about 35 years, when it comes to the crunch, things aren't quite as kosher as people expected. In other words, they assumed if you spent this much money, this much output, this much teacher training, the results would follow automatically, formulaically, mechanistically. Humans are much idiosyncratic. We're not machines yet. We are indulgent. We are afeared. We are overconfident. We are given free will. And so old patterns are hard to break down in interlingual and educational terms. So the early warning signs that the spectacular growth to date may be questioned, and this is the difficult thing for Basque leaders, by both proponents and opponents alike. You can imagine if your historical dominant majority said, what a waste of money. These kids can't speak Basque. They can't hold their exam system well in the Basque language. You can take that on board, because that's what you expect the dominant majority to say when an intrusive minority changes the paradigm shift of power. But when your own supporters begin to doubt, has this experiment failed? And I'm talking not about the average person in the street, I'm talking about people like you, professionals, who are teacher trainers, or university lecturers, or doctors or nurses, who are saying, we have a thin patina of Basque in our work, but when the difficult work starts, we switch to Spanish. Despite all the abilities and the skills to perform a processual chain of commands and information sharing. So if you're a breast cancer nurse in a hospital in the Basque Country, you may start the first 10 minutes in Basque because the parent, the wife, the mother, or the daughter sometimes, is comfortable in using their language. But when it comes to the serious analytical and diagnostic use of the language, you switch to Spanish. For fear of something worse, misunderstanding, not quite getting the specialists that you want, etc., etc. Now you say, well, in a one-off case, that's acceptable. But if the whole system is argued that we now use Basque as our default lingua propria, and yet at every time you enter that system to test that, you're disappointed, you begin to wonder how credible is the system. So the more it goes on, of course, the more self-reproducing it will become. But for the moment, there's a little crisis amongst the Basque professional and intellectual elites. as to what are we doing? Have we managed the expectation of the public in a sufficiently cautious manner? Or have we believed our own hype that we are now not dominant, but progressive? And that's a real issue, because despite the success story, the underlying structural seeds are there of doubt. And once doubt sets in, people begin to question the allocation of funding, the university rules for engagement, the quality of engagement with medics, etc. So they are expecting a backlash over the next 5 years. Diffident, dissident, and disappointed citizens. So growth does not automatically produce use. So the biggest challenge for regional education systems in Europe is what happens once the classroom has been left behind? What seeds is the educational system given to the child to allow that person to engage in the maximum number of domains with confidence? You control the educational system because it's confined, it's programmatic. What happens when the real world kicks in post-18 in terms of language choice and language use? Well, in 2 weeks' time, a new program has been adopted by the Basque society together called Evidencebased. It's an engagement between government at all levels and citizens at all levels. Understandably, even here in Quebec, citizens don't necessarily engage with government. There's been an historical disassociation in the Basque Country between the citizen movement for change and government reticence to adopt certain programs. Well, because of this new climate of realism, all the groups that have constituent elements in the Basque civil society have come together with government support, but not leadership. The leadership comes from the community, comes from the ground up, to initiate new patterns of language use in society. Having had a generation of education success, they now want to root the use of Basque in sporting clubs, in economic development, scientific endeavours. So for the next period, November to December, this organisation, Evidencebased, is seeking a new programme to engage active speakers with active listeners, to reinforce the use of Basque in public. And even if only 10% of these new relationships stick, that's 10% more than you have today. Because in many cases, of course, you can't identify the language skills of a person by their name or by their look. And of course, historically, often the first language you use when you meet somebody tends to be the language you reproduce every time you meet them. I didn't know he spoke Basque. I didn't know he spoke Irish. Yes, I do. Well, let's speak Irish. It's not very good, I'm not very competent, etc., etc. So you need social mobilization programs to establish new patterns of interaction, and hoping that some of that sticks. And if you do it often enough, in a mass movement program, some behavioral change may result. So that's the hope. That's why I showed you as a model. So 11 days of active use of Basque in all situations. Not compulsory, but conformist. If this is the new reality we want to introduce in Euskadi, then we must initiate entry points where people outside the formal system of education and public administration can use the language. And as you might expect, the vast majority of new people who are learning Basque are what they call attentive ears. They're willing, they're patient, they want to improve their Basque by using it more regularly, and so they're signalling their badges, they're signalling that they want to be talked to in Basque in shops, doctors' waiting rooms, etc., etc. Lots of other Europeans have changed patterns of behaviour in the last 40 years by using something similar, but usually with signs and symbols rather than active use of the language. So the last case study for the last 5 minutes or so will be my home country, Wales. This is the National Parliament of Wales. It doesn't look much. It's an eco-friendly parliament. Everything there self-regulates. Rainwater, heating. It's the most advanced ecological building in Wales, I was going to say the world. It's a symbol of the new confidence since devolution that the Welsh people have. 3.2 million people live in Wales, 6% of the UK population. I live 2.5 hours from London. It's a miracle that Welsh has survived. So, we're not talking about French here, we're talking about Welsh. Nowhere else in the world, apart from the small colony in Patagonia, uses Welsh today. Two little things quickly. Education and language used to be overseen by the Welsh Language Board, which was a non-governmental agency at arm's length from the UK Parliament and the Welsh Office, and I was for 12 years the strategist of the Welsh Language Board. It was abolished in 2012 because it was non-representative. In other words, the people were appointed by civil service examination, but they weren't party political representatives. And after devolution, that annoyed the political parties. They didn't control us. They nominated us, or they approved us, but we weren't an extension of Conservative, Labour, Plaid Cymru, Liberal Party policy programmes. We were independent specialists, different skills, planning for Welsh medium education, the Welsh language in society and the economy. So what happened was you split the promotional part into government and the regulatory part into the commissioner. As I've hinted, in 2017, the government recommended that this arrangement be reconstituted as a commission for the Welsh language with 4 units: promotion, regulation, IT, and research, to bring everything back in-house, because they argued it was a more efficient way of promoting a small minority language. So in terms of shaping the new commission, which will happen in the next few weeks, we have a new system, and parallel to that new system, we have a brand new educational and language strategy. Why am I emphasizing this? Because you can't talk about education in isolation. If you have a grievance in educational terms, you need a regulator, you need an ombudsman, you need a commissioner, you need somebody in authority to arbitrate when the educational system seems to be denying you your rights, or abrogating your rights, or closing schools, etc. So the new strategy is called Welsh Cymraeg 2050, and in 2016, the First Minister, Carolyn Jones, argued that in the next 30 years, the aim of all successive Welsh governments would be to create 1 million speakers. At the moment, there has 640,000 Welsh speakers, about 21% of the population. So having 1 million speakers, you need an extra 400,000, but in reality you need an extra 1 million, because the vast majority of people who are produced as Welsh speakers in Wales move to England or Saudi Arabia or America or Canada. When I was 23, I came to Canada as a student in Western Ontario and then Laval and Toronto. I was typical of my generation. We left Wales. I went back when I was 43 because the university was gracious enough to give me a chair. But as far as I'm concerned, when I finished my studies, I was going somewhere else in the world. Wales is New Brunswick. It's not Quebec. It's not Catalonia. It's New Brunswick. Limited opportunities for professionals in New Brunswick, I should imagine. So you move. The education system is geared up to make you successful to move. But in the small language community, migration means relative loss of language. And when you increase the proportion to Welsh as their studies, which is now about 42% for primary school and 24% for high school, what use is Welsh in Saudi Arabia? Or London? Or Frankfurt? Montreal? So there are real issues about public expenditure, prioritising, and economic infrastructure development. Anyway, the aim is to get 1 million speakers. These are the 6 key areas. Which one of those do you think is going to bear all the responsibility for producing these speakers? Education. Why are teachers downcast and disheartened? Because they're it. They're responsible for everything. And there's fewer of them. And they're not trained particularly well in terms of Welsh medium education. And yet the expansion of the system demands more and more personalities. So these are the targets. 1 million speakers in a generation. If the target isn't met, does it really matter? What really matters is the real usage of Welsh in real situations. Not a titular number that symbolically any government can say, we've created a new generation of speakers. The reality is what happens in the hospital room, or what happens in the clinic, or what happens when you go out with a girl. What language do you use? It used to be said, what language do you pray to God? Kick a dog. I think that's unfair. So let's use real things. Medicine, health, love, poetry, the real things which animate people's lives. So, the key to the growth is education. We're woefully inadequate in terms of preparation for this new strategy. It's political hype with very little investment in the delivery system. If we are to create 1 million speakers in the next generation, tomorrow we need 800 new primary teachers. We have 62 new recruits to one college. We need huge investment in IT, so that when a student physically is doing biology or chemistry or organic chemistry or applied mathematics age 16, if all the material is in English and yet the instruction is in Welsh, by definition, the responsibility for translating all that is on the student's shoulders. And no willing supplicant student is going to say, I'll choose to do organic chemistry age 18 in Welsh, and I can do it in English. Logic and rationality argue that unless you prepare a relatively equal playing field, rational choice doesn't follow. And we're talking about English, not Slovene or Portuguese as our neighbour language. We're talking about English. And so in many ways, there's a huge infrastructural program which needs to be articulated by citizenry to reach this target. Well, the good news is that in some areas the government is responding. In higher education, the government has created a Coleg Cymraeg Cenedlaethol, which is an adjunct college which adjuncts itself to each of the 7 universities in Wales, and the government for 5 years is investing in 220 Welsh medium university lectureships in domains which weren't historically taught at university in Welsh. Accountancy, pharmacy, dentistry, civil engineering. Why? Because these are the jobs that people are likely to want to take up once they leave university and stay, not necessarily in their community, but in Wales. And so the government is beginning to invest in opportunities which realise bilingualism as a societal norm. The second thing the government is doing is training teachers. My department takes many teachers every semester who have a smatching of Welsh but wouldn't feel confident in teaching in a Welsh medium school. But they're bilingual, but English is dominant. And so for 16 weeks they come to my department, everything is paid for, their accommodation, their instruction, and they become fluent and competent and confident in teaching their subject area in Welsh at the end of their time. And then they have refresher courses. What's the problem? The problem is they tend to leave the schools that sponsor them. So headmasters and head teachers are reticent to yield their ambitious staff to this program, because in 2 years' time they lose them, because they get promoted into the Welsh medium system. So the third alternative at the moment is to initiate bilingual education in the dominant English schools. So you have more and more streams using Welsh for humanities, maths, religion, sport, etc. Why is that important? 80% of the population of Wales consistently in attitude studies says it would like to be bilingual. But because of their parental choice, or the fact that there's no bilingual school in the local area, they are deficient in their Welsh. But if you can inculcate the Welsh language as a medium instruction, as well as a subject, you satisfy some of this desire. And so what you now have is a very mixed continuum of bilingual education from designated Welsh medium schools, 442, right the way through to historically Catholic, Church of Wales, English-only schools, which have 20% of their teaching in Welsh. So perhaps in 30 years' time, every school in Wales might be a form of bilingual school. from dominant to subordinate Welsh. And that in turn may not only just create the million speakers, but normalise the use of Welsh in public life. And that's the aim of strategists such as myself. So I'll finish now with the wider context, the unknowns. Language in many days in the Basque Country and Wales is not as encouraging as we would wish. It's still a struggle. It's not a proven reality. There are increased commercial pressures and fiscal pressures on the designated Welsh medium Basque Country system. Why should we waste public taxes on this minority schooling? It's an old story here, I know. And the great debate is Brexit. Because until Brexit, Irish, Welsh, Gaelic, Breton, Basque peoples could huddle together for mutual encouragement and say, we are not the poor orphans of an English imperial system, we are a common European diverse set of nations. Because the discourse was European. Not a European Union necessarily, but European. After Brexit, the discourse may be Britain. So Gaelic in Scotland, Welsh in Wales, Irish in Northern Ireland may revert to a 19th century superordinate-subordinate power relationships. And you can't appeal to a common European home anymore because the decision-making is made in Westminster. So one of the consequences of Brexit is a change of discourse and mindset as to what counts in terms of the enrichment of citizens in the United Kingdom. And I'll leave this last slide just to ask, if we do have a new system, in what way will the new system increase use of Welsh, create new speakers, ensure policy consistency, and allow international activity despite the disengagement of Britain from the European Union system? So diolch yn fawr i chi am wrando, dyna ddiwedd fy nghyfeiriad.
Yes, thank you. So you mentioned at the beginning that in the EU framework, the idea is a mother tongue plus two. So in the examples you gave, let's take Wales, so English, Welsh, and what is the preferred other multi-language?
Historically, it used to be, speak to the microphone, sir?
Yes, please.
Excuse me, madam. I'll do this. Historically, it used to be French, but increasingly Spanish is much more popular than it used to be. It hasn't displaced French, but parents in particular are asking the question, what will their language be used for? And without being unkind, most people in Britain go to Spain for their holidays. So they want Spanish, not because of the literature, but because they've ordered their fish and chips and their beer. Well, like a down in Spanish. French is still dominant. The difficulty is that modern language teaching in Britain has taken a nosedive because it's no longer compulsory at each of the key stages. And the other difficulty, which is perhaps true here, you have a crowded curriculum. The more you increase new subjects, the less the traditional core subjects that we were taught when we were young just become one of 14 instead of one of 8. So French is the dominant second language in Britain and in Wales. You wouldn't be surprised to know that in bilingual schools, students do much better in French and Spanish or German than in English medium schools. They're already bilingual, they're used to making mistakes or translating in their head, and so they're more competent in learning a second or third foreign language. The difficulty, of course, is that, with all due respect, there's a shortage of teachers in Britain, full stop. It used to be in the 70s a very safe, high prestige, female-oriented occupation. Today, many people shun going to teaching. It's too much like crowd control. I'm being crude, but you understand. The challenges which we heard it yesterday, a diverse population set, not just in terms of language skills, but in behavioural modification terms, is a huge challenge for teachers. And so many people no longer see teaching as being either a desirable or a permanent So what you have is a huge out-migration of teachers after about 5 or 6 years. Heavily trained, hugely ambitious when they're 22, by the time they're 32, I'm worn out. Let's go and do something else which is easier. And that's a sad truth. And it doesn't make it any easier. The government says, well, all the behavioural problems are because you're not a good teacher. Conservative politicians tend to say that publicly. The quality of our teaching is poor. It's not, it's excellent. They're just knackered.
I was very impressed with your description of the success of the experiment. And they went from 20% to 80% in the Icastolas.
Yes.
But then you say it's a relative success because I think I'm quoting you there, that it's unfair to expect L2 to match L1 after a few years. Now, by L1, do you mean the dominant language?
No, I mean those who come from Basque-speaking homes,
Yeah.
who went to the original Icastolas, were comfortable Basque speakers. They were what you might call natural Basque speakers.
Okay.
The Basque education system refused to differentiate between mother tongue Basque speakers and new learners. They taught them all together.
Okay.
Whereas in the last few years, educational professionals and teacher training colleges said, well, this is just unfair. We need to stream our students, not according to cognitive ability only, but the language skills. The Basque governments, and there have been different governments, of course, some nationalists, some socialists, have said, no, that undermines the normality of Basque for everybody. We want everybody to reach this level. But the reality is, of course, people have different skill sets. If there's no reinforcement at home, the only time you use Basque is in the classroom. And then you may do so in a very reticent, reluctant manner. And if you don't do well in the school system, you don't blame yourself or the parents, you blame the language. And the parents then say, well, his cousin in Navarre goes to Spanish school, he did much better in his exams, and he's not as bright as little Joanne. You get the point. So it takes generations to adjust to a new reality and to internalize weakness and fragmentation as being normal, rather than exceptional and blaming it on the language of instruction. But the university system is entirely Basque, the formal education. Now, with all due respect, until about 10 years ago, most of those lecturers never spoke Basque in public. Yet you're expected to do astrophysics in Basque. So what they do, they're all professionals here, different strategies. The public rhetoric is Basque. The reality is somewhat different.
We have a question here for you. Sorry, Colin, a question Minority languages you've discussed are not English, which is very powerful. What are your thoughts about Quebec, where English is a minority language?
I've got two thoughts. My first thought is to shut up and not say anything. Not to say what my second thought is. If you want me to be very honest, when Richard and others invited me, I thought, what on earth do they want lessons from Europe about minority language education for English in Canada?
Yeah.
I understand it's slightly different. The difficulty, of course, is that if you believe yourself to be Teflon coated, in other words, nothing sticks, you're sufficient unto yourselves, you are self-confident, then you won't take any advice from anywhere. But if you accept that what in fact you are is a very mixed population, with the same challenges as any other multilingual society faces in the advanced world, then at least some initiatives, some insights, some best practices can be discussed, not necessarily adopted. But I know when I first used to come and talk about French language issues in either New Brunswick or Quebec or Ontario, people would say, oh yes, but the only people that suffer like us are, they'd give you a long list of people from Francophonie. And so what about Catalan? Oh yes, they're interesting, but we've got nothing much to learn from them, etc., etc., etc. Everybody thinks they're unique. But most of the issues that I've heard discussed yesterday, and I'm sure discussed today and tomorrow, they're the same issues. Quality, access, power differentials, money, influence, who controls what, and how do you best represent yourself as in need of something without making yourself a supplicant. But an honest citizen who says, I want this part of my future guaranteed by law or by regulation or by practice because I'm a taxpayer, I'm an electorate, I'm a citizen. Now most people think that approach is boring, they want to be emotionally charged. But as the Catalans say, you have to use the head and the heart. And you have to know when to use either and both. If you only use one, you're basically lost. Because you have to plan your priorities. We heard it yesterday, very rational ideas. So I would say, I never think of English speakers in Canada as a minority anywhere, frankly, because you have the whole of the world, in a sense, to reinforce you. But I think of English speakers in Quebec when they are service deliverers or service providers or service receivers as perhaps being a minority which needs to guard its own interests and mobilize and be active without being necessarily party political. The problem with most minorities is they are trapped in an ideology which demands that they align themselves with one historical political party. And it's not for me to tell you how to vote. But if your discourse and your ideology can be categorized, it can be put on the shelf and ignored. Whereas if your discourse is diffuse, robust, self-sustaining, and organic from the ground up, it is part of the public good of society. And in all my work in Europe, particularly, I argue that our diversity should be seen as a public good. Not as a woe is me, I am undone minority, please help me. Because you're already lost if you start like that. You are as equal as anybody else, but you must behave in an equal manner as a public citizen in the public space, asking for public goods. And that public good means English language services. It's a tax revenue issue to be normalized in public discourse, just like anything else. So that would be my real answer. Behave in the way you want to be treated.
Well,
A bit unfair, but you get the point.
we would like to applaud Colin's contribution.